Have you ever heard of this man?
What? Johnny Wilkinson says his name on the back there. Is that who it is? It must be him.
Yeah, Daniel William Carter.
Oh, I've heard of him.
Former All Black fly half. On the 22nd of February 2015, he had a Skype call. That's the page I'm on here, and I'm glad he documented it in a book.
On the 31st of October 2015, he kicked the ball with his right foot.
Yeah, he did, or his wrong foot, as the case may be.
That was a play on words.
So, since he retired, almost a full decade ago, from rugby, the All Black 10 shirt has been in a weird place. For a long time, you had Aaron Cruden there. For a long, long time, you've had Bowden Barrett floating around. You had Damien McKenzie there. You've also had another guy, Richie Mo'unga, who has been, I think, was incumbent of the shirt sporadically, him and Bowden Barrett kind of battling for it for about 5 years. And then he ran off to Japan, and he went and hid there, and he played for the Brave Lupus, where he was exceptional, where he was absolutely brilliant. And now he's coming back.
It's really exciting, isn't it? Because I know it's one of those weird things when a world-class player goes to Japan that there could be quite hit or miss. Like, it took Cheslin Colby a couple of seasons to get firing over there, whereas with Richie Mo'unga, he has been absolutely world-class still over there. His standards haven't dropped. For context, he, as a fly half, has scored 12 tries in 18 games this season. He has scored in all but 7 games that he's played in, which is crazy for a fly half. Those are like outstanding numbers. And that obviously only tells you half the story of what Richie Mo'unga, what kind of a player he is, because as a fly half, he's kind of the full package. Like, he runs the show in every way you physically can, both attacking and defensively. And so the thought of him coming back to international rugby is brilliant.
He was Player of the Season in Japan Rugby League 1 in 2024. He was very much, I think, in contention for that again this year, just gone. He is a guy who hasn't shirked on any of this, who has played to his full capacity there, just as he was always a guy, and you see this all the time, right, of players who are brilliant for their club, they then get into their international team, and once they become a regular and establish themselves, they then phone it in a bit for their club. And they kind of aren't turning up in the same way, and they aren't the same player there. Mo'unga's never been that guy. He always played a lot of his best rugby for the Crusaders, and especially even when he became an All Black, he was going back, and because he was now used to a higher intensity and a higher standard, he was able to translate that down and just look like a cut above and just look absolutely brilliant. That's the other part that's being lost in this, right? People are talking about coming back to the All Black fold. He's also going back to the Crusaders, and he'll make an enormous difference to them. Like, they were obviously much improved on the year before, but I think this will move them back up to very much being like close to where they were 3 or 4 years ago.
An important part of the clause of the contract, the announcement the All Blacks made today, is that he's coming back in July 2026. So that is the end of next Super Rugby season. So he's going to play the season in Japan, and then he's going to play at least one NPC game, which will make him eligible to play for the All Blacks again in October. So the autumn of next year is when. Can
you imagine being the poor 10 in that NPC game when Mo'unga erupts up?
Yeah, that's going to be crazy. And then the next season he will be at the Crusaders in 2027 to get a full season of Super Rugby of that standard back up there to then go to the World Cup in 2027 is the idea. So he has a full kind of 2-year plan revolving around this. So he gets another season of dominating in Japan, let's be honest.
Which is also a short season, good for his body, good for his kind of like mental health to have some switch off, some rest. Because the season is done in, 4 months, 3 months, right? And he then has basically the rest of the year lying about, has to go into training at some point, but much lower intensity physically and mentally on his body.
Lower toll on his body. And also, it's not like he will weaken as a part of that, because the style of rugby they play in Japan evidently really suits how he likes to play. Like, it is lots of passing. Like, when there is space in behind, he will kick the ball. But also, there's loads of space. They play on big pitches in sweltering heat. Like, the defences they'll sometimes fall off tackles later in games, and that's where he makes line breaks.
The big thing about Japan, right, broadly it's true, the attack is up to the same standard as Super Rugby or European Club Rugby. The defence is not. And so you get these very open, very high-scoring games, and it's really suited the way he plays. But the question is, does he suit the way the All Blacks are playing right now? He was the 10 for most of Scott Robertson's time at the Crusaders. He was the guy he built an awful lot of the system around. And when we did our deep dive on Scott Robertson last season, and we looked at his Crusaders teams, so much of them are built around Mo'unga. And I think we've seen the All Blacks have been a little bit floaty, I'd say, over the last year or so, right? And it feels like they need someone to kind of stick things to a little bit. And I think going back and forth between Bodie and DMAC hasn't helped necessarily in that. And I also think that's the kind of player that DMAC is. They've kind of become a reflection of that. DMAC is quite a floaty player. He doesn't go, even though he will make big decisions to call big things on himself, he isn't necessarily a guy who feels like he's bossing the game, right? He makes individual decisions that move you towards bossing a game, but it rarely feels like he's, taking it by the scruff of the neck.
He's a bit more secure, isn't he?
Yeah.
He doesn't try and dominate that 10 channel every single time, that he will happily divide up some of the distribution with some of the other players, because they've got so many players in that backline who can step in, whether starting or like players on the fringes, right? They like to have a backline full of ball players.
Yeah.
And so, if they've got in Bowden Barrett or Stephen Perifetta or Ruben Love, whatever, playing at the back, then they can step in and let DMAC step aside into kind of centre position.
I can see him being the missing piece for New Zealand. Yeah. I can see him being the bit that they've been missing and giving them something to build the team around, which I think they are currently lacking.
Yeah.
It's something I've seen talked about the last few days, is the way in which Robertson is desperate to build depth, and he's desperate to have 4 players in each position available for the World Cup to select from that are good enough for international standard, and that is his goal. And I think that is all well and good, but I think you also need 1 or 2 players in your team who you go, they are our guy.
Yeah.
And at the minute, that is Ardi Sarvea.
Yeah.
He is absolutely nailed into that, somewhere in the back row, right? 7 or 8 jersey, most likely. You then kind of go, well, Bowden is going to be in the 23 somewhere, but he could easily be 10, he could be 15. We saw last year just how good he was coming off the bench against England last year. Like, he was sensational coming on. So do they look to use him in that role instead? He's someone in the 23s, you can't really put him in. Again, Geordie Barrett is probably in there.
I'd say Geordie Barrett
He's like 99% in there.
Yeah.
But like, who's a centre partner, So you're kind of at the minute looking at, and Roygaard, I guess, has nailed himself in there.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But he isn't yet a player, again, who I think you're going...
When you've had Aaron Smith for 10
right?
years,
exactly.
It's different, isn't it? And that's the whole thing with Mo'unga coming back in. There's 2 sides to it, right? One, the coldest take I can offer you is Richie Mo'unga would be the absolute perfect 10 for the style of rugby Scott Robertson's trying to play with the All Blacks. We know that because he did it with the Crusaders and won titles with Richie Mo'unga as the leader of that. He was the face of them winning Super Rugby back to back to back to back. Anyway.
I just want to clarify, my point isn't these are the guys that are definitely first choice for the All Blacks.
Yeah.
My point is these are the guys it feels like the All Blacks are building a team around.
Yes.
And at the minute it's only really Surveyor and a little bit Geordie Barrett.
Yeah, yeah. And with that, the Roygaard point that you make there, because Roygaard is one of the best 9s in the world at the moment. However, it's different. It's in a different way to what Aaron Smith was. Because Aaron Smith, and to an extent TJ Perinara, who they also had in with him, they built their entire game plan around the pass that Aaron Smith could do. And it's similar to what we constantly go on about James Gibson Park with Ireland, and how much Andy Farrell and Andrew Goodman are letting their pack play off Gibson Park, and how with the Lions they've let Finn Russell play off Gibson Park, right? They had that with Aaron Smith. That was how the All Blacks broadly used Mo'unga and to an extent Bowden Barrett when he played at 10, that they put them in wider positions so that pass could take more players out of the game. And that they would often play off 9, so the forwards could stand wider, and they could also use Mo'unga as a strike runner as well as a playmaker. Now, this is a bit different, the way that Robertson likes to play, because he's always, obviously he didn't have Aaron Smith as the 9 at the Crusaders. He was instead using Mo'unga to just get loads of touches of the ball. They had the likes of like Mitch Drummond playing 9 for them, who was like a really crisp 9, closer, I suppose, to like a Cortez Ratimer or a Noah Hotham than an Aaron Smith, right? And they got Richie Mo'unga to touch the ball loads and to just dump it off to whichever option, like have loads of forwards who come off them, sometimes on inside balls.
It was all point of focus. It was moving the point of focus as quickly as possible, as often as possible. So that became lots of passes instead of 1 or 2 really crisp, long passes.
It was changing the picture for the defence all the time, right? And sometimes that meant that they broadly played a 2-4-2 structure, but it was so loose that they were willing to just let forwards go, no, if you see a line, run it.
And they played it all off 10, which is rare. Like most teams that play 2-4-2 play it off 9. But the Crusaders played it off 10, and it was brilliant.
And whenever they did play off 9, that was literally so they could go out the back to Mo'unga.
Yeah. It's also incredibly hard to play, at least it was at the time when they started doing it, a 2-4-2 off 10, because it demands your props to deliver passes sort of fly half style with that accuracy with very little time because the defence gets up in their face.
Yeah.
And the way in which they were able to play that and execute that was really sharp. Back then, you forget that just back in like 2018-19, right? Like, props only really being able to pass under no pressure was pretty regular.
Yeah.
Like that's come on so far in the last few years, and a large part of that was because of that structure that Mo'unga was so brilliant at. And I think it doesn't suit Bowden Barrett particularly well, and DMAC can play it, but obviously Bowden can play it because he's a brilliant rugby player. But
it doesn't get the best out of him as an individual, though.
No.
Yeah.
Mo'unga, on the other hand, I think you do get the most out of him.
Yeah.
And I think we might see both him play his best international rugby and make the All Black system sing a little bit more.
Yeah. And it allows you to move Bodie to 15 or DMAC to 15, so you can get the most out of those guys as individuals when it comes to giving them open spaces to run into. And yeah, you would imagine that what they would do here is they will play a lot more off 10 here, that they will try and find edges and then just get it to Mo'unga so he can assess the options and everyone can play around him.
Yeah.
And that's really good as well because that gets more out of Cam Roygaard, because Roygaard's obviously a really good kicker of the ball, but the main thing is he's quite old school in that he really likes looking for space around the fringes. That's where he's really good, and he's got an outstanding offloading game and he's really quick. So I think that will open up more space for him as well because it will stretch the defence a little bit more. That's what typically teams who play off 10 try and do, is force the defence to fan out a little bit more. So, yeah.
However, I do want to move us on a bit because there's another conversation I think is hidden underneath this, right? Which is Richie Mo'unga I think he's 30 now, isn't he?
Yeah.
So he will be
31.
31. So he's going to be 33 at the World Cup, right? Bowden Barrett's going to be 36 at the World Cup. And Damien McKenzie's going to be, 34, 35 at the World Cup?
Yeah.
So you're potentially looking at their free fly halves travelling to that tournament, all being in their mid-30s and all retiring after that tournament. And the All Blacks, as it stands, I think quietly, because they've got 3 exceptional flight halves, but underneath that, they have a bit of a 10 problem.
Yeah.
They haven't produced a young breakthrough fly half in the way pretty much every other nation has. And you look at, this is an extreme example, right? But you look at the way in which Wales failed to, even though the players coming through at URC level, right? Same as there have been players at Super Rugby level. There are a lot of those players like Alun Wyn Jones, Dan Biggar, etc. They didn't blood in replacements in time, and it led to the situation now. I'm not saying that happened for the All Blacks, but it's one position where that feels like a problem, where you can have a very sudden drop-off very, very quickly. And you've obviously got Harry Plummer's got, 1 cap, maybe just 2. You've got Stephen Parafeta's picked up 5 or 6 caps, most of them at fullback.
Ruben Love, likewise.
Ruben Love, likewise, primarily a fullback, or primarily has played fullback for the All Blacks.
That's it. They've not trusted these guys to step into the 10 berth yet.
That was how it worked with both DMAC and Bowden Barrett. Both of them came through as fullbacks and then were given more and more responsibility at 10 once they're a year or 2 into national careers. You also got Just Jacob as well, who played for the All Black 15 against Georgia, was great, played for that awful Barbarians team against South Africa the other month as well. But it's been going very well at Super Rugby level. I really like the look of. But none of these guys are nailed in yet, right? The most capped fly half that's come through in the last few years, last 5 years, post-COVID, is Parafeta, who's got 5 caps. By this point in the World Cup cycle, right, between 2011 and 2015, Bowden Barrett, who won his first cap in, I think, the second game of that World Cup cycle, he had 12 caps by this point, right? And obviously then goes on, scores the winning try in the final in 2015, and is a legitimate option, can then take over in 2016 when Carter retires, and then when Cruden picks up injuries, he established himself, he's named World Player of the Year a year later. He really builds from there. They haven't brought that player through.
Yeah.
Harry Plummer, I think he looks excellent. As I think Jacob looks good.
Yeah.
I think Parafeta is still getting on a bit and has been playing primarily as a fullback and feels more like a stopgap thing.
Yeah.
But it feels like New Zealand's produced a lot of Ehire Wests and not really an Aaron Cruden.
Yeah.
And we can't expect Dan Carter or Bowden Barrett all the time, but you want your nation to be producing Aaron Crudens, guys who are good enough to play international rugby to an outstanding standard.
It's the best and worst position this can happen in, isn't it? Because all it takes is one mercurial talent who is probably about 16 years old, who we've never heard of at the moment, coming through in 2-3 years' time and being a standout talent. And as you mentioned, like most nations recently have had someone like that come through. You look at Sasha Feinberg and Ngomazulu, you look at Finn Smith, you look at Sam Prendergast. Like
Dan Edwards.
Dan Edwards, to an extent, like
Finn Smith, Marcus Smith.
Yeah, Finn Smith. You going back a couple of years, you like the likes of Mathieu Jalibert who've come through. Like these players come through a lot in rugby, and often they need that kind of time in the saddle, that they need to be chucked in the deep end a little bit. And we've not really seen that in Super Rugby for New Zealand in the last couple of years. But at the same time, you can't just hit and hope that something like that's going to happen. That can't be your main strategy. That's
what it feels like. To quote Mission Impossible Fallout, the greatest movie of the century, hope is not a strategy. And that very much feels like the way they've been. They've kind of, I think, it's kind of been a problem with a lot of All Black rugby over the last decade, is that they've just assumed because they produce so many world-class players, they produce an absolute surplus of them,
Yeah.
that they'll keep happening. And all it needs is one position of those players to not come through. But the other side of this, right, and it's quietly going on in the background, Fergus Burke's going to play for Scotland.
Yeah.
I say Armstrong Mavulu has gone and played for Fiji. Like, they've lost a couple of prospects there, and they potentially, I'm not saying they would have been All Blacks, but like, they're guys who are still, Burke's 24, and Armstrong Mavulu's like 21, I think, still. So they still could have kicked on in the next 2 or 3 years, and yet they've already lost them to other nations. That becomes a worry as well, do they need to be taking better care of these players? That becomes partly a financial thing, partly an opportunity thing, but...
Josh Duani's gone to Samoa. Like, you know, you're right that it's a funny one because they've gone through so many years just having sheer riches at 10.
Yeah.
That you look at
or
like
Richies.
Richies indeed, but you think
them
back
losing Gareth Anscombe wasn't a big deal.
Exactly.
Right? Because they had this generation of 10s.
100%. That you look at 10 plus years ago, you were looking at Aaron Cruden being the second best 10 in New Zealand, also the second best 10 in the world.
Yeah.
At certain points,
Yeah.
you're looking at Stephen Donald being kind of the fourth best 10 and a bit of a laughing stock in New Zealand. Whereas, let's be honest, for most of the nations, he'd have been the first or second choice.
The starter, yeah.
Yeah, and he was
Colin Slade.
Yeah, exactly. And these were really good players they were bringing through. And now we're kind of at the other side of that, the logical conclusion of that, where suddenly we've kind of taken this for granted for a long enough time. But granted, at the same time, like, Richie Mo'unga was that wonder kid who came through out of nowhere. There was a point where everyone was going, oh, Dan Carter's retiring. Oh, Aaron Cruden's retiring. I know we have Bodie, but what else do we have? I guess DMAC is also an option, but he was a fullback at that point, you know, who have we got to come through? Then Richie Mo'unga just comes out of nowhere and literally just becomes world-class overnight.
Well, okay, so the question, but also... Mo'unga had a long time where he was uncapped, where he was kind of floating around Super Rugby and being excellent, and played for Barbarians, right? So maybe Josh to come, maybe that is the, Jacob, sorry, maybe that is the natural fit, right? In that he was the Barbarians 10 for a couple of games and played for New Zealand 15, I don't know. But the question is, right, because I don't like to just go, this is a problem. I want to like throw out, so what would you do? If you were Scott Robertson, right, and you're eyeing this up, obviously Richie Mo'unga is going to be the guy for the big games. But you've got one eye beyond that. Imagine you're going to continue beyond that World Cup.
Yeah.
What would be your eye to that if you went in, you brought in DMAC, you brought in Bowden, you brought in Richie Mo'unga, and all of them went, yeah, I'm going to retire for the World Cup. Like, how do you start planning for this?
I think you've got to give Perifetta some games at 10.
Yeah.
And Ruben Love, now that you've capped him, you have to give him like some games at 10. Got Autumn Series coming up. That is the lowest pressure like test series that you have.
Well, these games against France should have been that.
They should have been that. They should have been that. And they've given Ruben Love a cap. So that's a good start, right? That they've given him a go so they can say, right, he's an All Black now. But there needs to be probably a test for each of those two lads, Perifetta and Ruben Love, in the autumn where you go, right, one of you's going to start 10, the other one's going to come off the bench.
Yeah.
Let's see how you two work on your own. Because there's a high chance that those two don't even go to the World Cup. But they have to prepare for that.
Yeah. Do you think the answer, and this is the interesting bit, is to spread it out and go, okay, we're going to give Perifetta a game, we're going to give Love a game, we're going to give Plummer a game, we're going to give Jackham a game? Or is it to go, Jacob's the guy I like the look of, I'm just going to put it all in that basket?
That is
the Prendergast gambit.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question, but I don't think now's the time for that, now that they know they've got Richie Mo'unga coming back, because... Let's be honest, Scott Robertson is going to mould his whole game plan around that.
Yeah.
And so maybe before they knew that Mo'unga was coming back, they could have made that assessment. But now I kind of feel like they're in too deep, in a way.
I think the situation you look at here as the comparison is the Welsh 10 jersey, as like the other great famous 10 jersey in international rugby, or, you know, the most romanticised. Dan Biggar obviously was set to retire for the World Cup. People expected Gareth Anscombe to go at the same time, right? And underneath that, Wales, over the few years leading into this, they capped Callum Sheedy, they capped Sam Costello, they capped Johan Lloyd at 10. They capped Jared Evans at 10. They capped like a huge range of, Sam Davis, huge range of players. None of them though got the game time because Biggar and Anscombe ate a lot of it up. And then they didn't eventually at the World Cup, they landed on Costello as the third choice. And he had one really good game in the warm-ups and that kind of like moved him up in the pecking order. Owen Williams also played 10 for Wales, that Six Nations in 2023, like we're starting above Biggar. So it then led to the situation, right, where they didn't have anyone nailed down because they spread too thinly on like one of these guys will step up and they'll be the answer, and none of them did.
Yeah.
And would Wales have been better to have gone when they're 20 to go, okay, we're going to count, even if it's Will Reed or someone, or like, Sam Costello, we're just going to chuck him in when he's 21, and we're going to give him a couple of games and bring him through. And I think maybe for me, that'll be the situation.
The other side of that is like, what are you going to do? Drop Damien McKenzie?
Yeah.
But also, once again,
but
Richie Mo'unga has another year before he's able to play Test rugby.
Look at this year for the All Blacks, right? And exactly, yeah. So you've got a year here.
So
right?
you've got a bridge.
You've got 2 games at George Bridge. You've got 2 games here. You've got the Springboks games, right? You pick Bowden and DMAC for those.
Yeah.
Those are the games you are targeting. You've got the Bledisloe. You want to make sure you win at least one of those so you don't lose to Bledisloe.
Yeah.
What a victory for Joe Schmidt though if he won it on his last game out.
That'd be hilarious.
So you've got basically 3 games you want to target. Then I forget who they're playing in the autumn, but like if you're playing Ireland, you want to, there's a few.
They've
of those.
got Wales in the autumn.
Yeah, they're playing Wales. I think they're playing Scotland. So
put Ruben Love at 10 for that game.
Exactly.
Honestly,
right.
Tear him apart.
But the rest of the year, you can kinda gamble a little bit. You can put a younger 10 in and have Bowden come off the bench against Argentina for one of those games.
Yeah.
One against Australia as well. You can do the same, as I say, like when you play Wales, that should be a fairly free hit.
Yeah.
There's a real opportunity here. Like this is the year to experiment, I think.
Like, I'm not being funny, right? I know that Wales are on a win streak at the moment, but if you put in Ruben Love in that game and he played really badly, the All Blacks will still win.
Yeah.
It's not going to be an issue.
I'll give you like 95% odds on that.
Yeah, you could just put Bodie on the bench and go from there.
Yeah.
You can bring him off at 60 minutes.
Though,
and it'll be
look,
fine.
we don't know what the Steve Tandy era looks like.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
That is true.
Okay. So, Richie Mo'unga coming back. Do you think this boosts the All Blacks' chance of winning the World Cup?
Yes,
Yes,
massively.
undoubtedly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Imagine I said no to that.
How far do you think it moves them up in the chances? I will leave this as a final thought.
Obviously, Hong Kong and Zimbabwe are both now qualified,
Yeah.
so it moves them from 24th to maybe 23rd, but I won't tell you which of those it moves them above. It's South Africa. What is a brave lupus?